Call the meeting to order. If you'll all please rise for invocation by Supervisor Watson, the Pledge of Allegiance by Supervisor Sockwell.
Let us bow our heads in remembrance of 9/11, of those victims and their families. Heavenly Father, in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There was a discrepancy with the time posting for the executive session, so we'll need to call for an executive session now.
Motion for executive session?
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We'll adjourn into an executive session. I ask that security keep an eye on all the attorneys in the room while we're out.
Watch the attorneys, huh?
We'll call the meeting back to order.
Motion to go out of executive session.
Right, we're back in regular session then. Item number 1 is ratify and award a contract number 102-13 with Arizona Department of Housing. Do I have a motion for discussion?
So moved.
Have a second, Supervisor?
Second,
Sokol?
yeah.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Susie, would you like to explain this, Mr. Ansel?
Supervisor Johnson, Supervisor Watson, Supervisor Sackwell, good afternoon. Community Services Department administers housing programs. Part of it is the housing rehab program. And I would like to think that we're doing a very good job, that Department of Housing found some extra money from a different county that couldn't spend it and called us up and say, do you want to spend $39,000? And of course, I said, yes, we can spend that. We have a couple of projects on the pipe being done, and the only condition we have is to spend it contract September and spend the money in September. And that's why I've requested to make this item as part of our board meeting today, so I could get good $39,000 from Department of Housing and to be used for some of our housing rehab project in Mohave County.
How will this help the project? You have to have it spent this month?
Yes, we could. We have a couple of contractors right now that may be awarded for a bid, and rather than spending a regular housing rehab funds that we have under a different contract, we can use this so we can expend it before the end of the month. Some of these contracts are small housing rehab contracts that we could actually complete the project by the end of September.
Anybody have any questions of Mr. Ansel?
No question.
Yeah,
We
no
have a motion
question.
to approve.
Thank you.
Make a motion to ratify the award of contract and change.
Second.
A motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Item number 2 is approval of amendment number 6 to contract 508-10 between the State of Arizona Department of Housing and Mohave County. This is a small amount that we just have a motion for.
Motion to approve.
Second motion.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 3 is approving the change of polling location for precinct 21, Littlefield, from the Beaver Dam Littlefield Fire Station of 630 North Highway 91, Beaver Dam, to Littlefield Unified School District's Governing Board Meeting Room at 3490 East Rio Virgin Road, Beaver Dam. A motion for discussion on this.
I'll just make a motion to approve the change, polling location
Second.
for precinct 21.
We have a motion and a second. Do you want to explain that, Alan, why you did that, and that you've got DOJ approval?
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Supervisor Watson, Supervisor Sockwell. Yeah, this was the issue that I had on Election Day a couple weeks back up in Beaver Dam, Littlefield at the fire station. Basically, they don't want us there anymore. Told us it's about time to start looking for another place. And we got people to band together and help us find a location. It's a very good location. I have it checked out. It's in the midst of the Department of Justice right now. I submitted it in for the change. It should make it just in time for the Election Day. I have no doubt that they're going to approve it because it's just moving not even across the street, almost in the backyard of the current location. So there should be no issues. Everything was followed through, and I feel very confident we're not going to have an issue with it. So I'm asking for the approval. They need to know that.
Good. And does that have the phone lines that you need for sitting?
It does. It has what we need, and they guaranteed me they'll have access to them. So,
That's good. Any other questions, Mr. Tempert?
No.
None? Okay, thank you, Alan.
thank you.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Guess Item number 4 can be discussed. The attorney's approval on that. We can have a discussion on the IDA before we do the 5.
Need a motion for discussion?
See if it's something we can.
Yes.
All right, yes.
Motion for discussion.
Second.
A motion and a second. There seems to be, and while we have an attorney here for the IDA, some confusion as to the role the county plays with the IDA. Is there an attorney who would like to come forward? Please state your name and address for the record, please, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, members of the board. I'm Franklin Hoover of Mangum Wall, Stoops and Warden, 100 North Eldon Street in Flagstaff.
All right. The county attempted to get some information before, and it seems, it is our understanding, looking at the statutes, that Industrial Development Authority was formed with the permission of Mohave County, under Mohave County, and you are a political subdivision unto yourself now. Is that the same idea that you have, same way you read it?
That's correct. The formation of industrial development authorities require the approval of the governing body of the jurisdiction in which they serve. In the case of the counties, the Board of Supervisors have to approve the initial formation, appoint the initial board, and commonly, as in Mohave County, they appoint the members to the board of the directors of the IDA. The Industrial Development Authority itself is an Arizona nonprofit corporation that is also specially designated as a political subdivision of the state, although it has no geographic limitations and no taxing powers and really no traditional governmental authorities, but it's designated a political subdivision of the state for the purpose of allowing tax-exempt financing to be brought to the area through bonds issued by the Industrial Development Authority.
And under that political subdivision, then they would follow all the same rules and requirements that the Board of Supervisors of Mohave County would follow.
I would say the Industrial Development Authority Board is subject to the Arizona open meeting law, but it's not subject to like internal rules that the county may have adopted or other statutes applicable to counties. They're subject to the Arizona open meeting law, and that's the only procedural statute that the Board of Directors of the IDA is subject to.
So let's see how, well, let me go to this one first. These members that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors, 9 citizens, what kind of liability do they have? I've noticed there's no insurance policy for these people covering them for any kind of liability.
And the bond issues that we do, we always make sure that, and our role as counsel of the IDA is basically make sure that the bonds are structured as pass-through bonds, which require 2 things: full contractual indemnity for the individual members of the board and the IDA itself for any liabilities associated with the bond. And as members of the IDA board, as members of a political subdivision of the board, they'd be subject to the traditional governmental immunities. We typically don't carry commercial liability insurance or anything, or public directors and officers liability insurance for the IDA boards because they only meet when we have applications. They're all volunteers. The number of meetings that we have depends on when a proposed financing transaction comes through, and to be honest, in the last 4 years, we haven't been very busy with the IDAs. This is the first application we've received since 2008. So because of the very limited role that the IDA boards play, the answer is there is, as an attorney, I never say never, but there is a very limited risk of exposure to individual liability for any members of these boards connected with their activities on the IDA.
I guess there's no liability unless something happens with the bond, and then they could, these people could possibly lose their homes or anything else, like anything in a lawsuit if something comes up.
No, I would say there's almost no risk of that happening the way the statutes are structured. The statutes provide for Board of Directors immunity. As members of a board of a nonprofit corporation, they're not individually liable for the debts of the corporation, the same as any nonprofit corporation. And in the contracts for financing, there is contractual rights of indemnity against the borrowers and the trustee for anything that happens. So members of the IDA board have about as much protection against that risk as they probably have better protection against that risk than you would do as members of the Board of Supervisors. There's really almost no likelihood that they would be individually liable for any of these issues, even if they did have a problem with, down the road with the financing.
If they have all that protection, I noticed in the statute that it says the county can purchase insurance for these people. Any idea why they would put that in the statute if they thought we didn't need insurance for them?
There are other industrial development authorities, primarily in Pima and Maricopa County, that do much more than the rural industrial development authorities. They're actually financed more directly by the county, and they do small business loans and other direct programs that in the rural counties we just don't do. We simply act as pass-through conduits for tax-exempt financing provided by the banks. So for Pima and Maricopa County, where they're actually meeting every month and having daily activities, they have office staff and executive directors that are administering programs directly. That would make more sense in that context.
All right.
But if you're offering to do that, I'm sure the board members would be happy to have that coverage.
Right, I think we'll probably ask staff to look at it, because I don't think it's only fair if we're asking citizens to sit on a board where there's a possibility that they can be sued, and this is a nonprofit that you don't have a bank account, do you?
Yes, they do maintain a bank account.
Now, how much money is in that bank account?
I haven't checked the Mohave IDA's bank account is not a significant amount
Right,
of money.
so it's not enough to probably, yeah. So that's something we should probably look into, just we're asking citizens to do this so we can cover them. There's another couple questions, more for the edification of the public who have asked us questions. Regarding bonding, in the past, when bonds have been issued in order to show that we as board members believed in the projects, we offered to buy bonds, saying, well, we'll show that it's a good idea, and it would be nice if all the people in our community could buy bonds. They're tax-free and stuff, and we were told those bonds can't be bought. Can you explain how the bonding process works? There's actually nobody in Mohave County that's probably going to buy a bond.
Sure, I'll try to explain the financing structure for IDA bonds that are different from municipal bonds that the County Board of Supervisors would issue if you exercise your bonding authority. The IDA bonds are issued to take advantage of tax credits and other tax exemptions for financing that are provided through the tax code and through different programs administered by either federal departments or the Arizona Department of Commerce. In a typical transaction, these aren't bonds that are actually sold and publicly marketed in order to generate the revenue to fund the project. We serve as a conduit between a lending agency, and in the case of the bond issue that's pending, it's National Bank of Arizona is the lender. We facilitate the financing to the borrower by passing it through the IDA. The bonds become subject to the tax exemptions and tax credits, whichever an advantage to the ultimate purchaser. But typically, for most of the bond issues that we're involved with, it's a single entity that becomes the bond holder, and that's the bank that fronts the money for the construction of the project. So these aren't publicly traded bonds. The IDAs can do certain transactions that become publicly traded bonds, but that's a rare example. Most of the situations that we deal with, there's a bank that is interested in financing the project. The transaction uses the IDA as the conduit to take advantage of the tax exemption to provide incentives for the financing agency to finance them. But in this project, there will be initially a single bondholder, and that will be the bank that provides the funds.
And then how do you choose the bank? Do you try to choose a local bank, or?
That's entirely driven by the applicant. Obviously, when the Industrial Development Authority is looking at a project, the fact that a local bank is involved is a benefit to the project. But there's Wells Fargo, National Bank, U.S. Bank. It's not always a local bank that provides financing. The touchstone for the Industrial Development Authority is the financing going to be used to construct a project that's listed in the statute authorizing the Industrial Development Authority to act? And if it does, we facilitate the financing. Having a local bank is obviously a better aspect of the project, but that's not a requirement under the statute.
Also, it's kind of been with the few times that we've used the Industrial Development Authority, not getting to the next item, but usually people have the idea that Industrial Development Authority would lend money for the creation of jobs. what do you see and I know it does mortgages, I don't want to get into mortgages because that's something we're never going to be able to do, but what do you see as the Industrial Development Authority being able to bond for, I mean, if it's not jobs?
Well, actually, the statute lists the types of projects that can be financed, which can be, and basically all the projects that the IDA can finance are bricks and mortar projects. We can't finance soft costs. We actually finance dirt moving or equipment being put into place. And there is no requirement under the IDA statute for there to be any particular amount of jobs created for the project. If the project is a dirt-moving project in the jurisdiction that fits within the statute, I mean, ideally, the projects that we finance, we want to have a long-term job creation effect. The last two that we've done in this jurisdiction have been the private prison construction and expansion of the local prison, which do have a long-term impact. The measure that's coming up next has a positive impact. Is it as much as we would normally want to see for a project? Of course not. We'd rather see, the ideal project for an IDA is to build a factory that is going to employ a number of local people for a long term of years. In Coconino County this morning, I drove by the Schuff Steel plant outside of Belmont, and that was financed with IDA financing. And that's obviously the ideal project. But to be honest, if the project creates a single job and it's not going to cost the taxpayers of the county anything, and that's an important point, that there's no taxpayer funds being used in this transaction, if the project facilitates any positive economic benefit, then there's no reason to turn it down. And in this case, there will be some local benefit. There will be a temporary creation of several jobs in the construction, and then a local maintenance contract to go along with it that will provide some positive economic impact. So that meets the criteria that we're looking for.
Are we, I guess, on the same page now with the requirements of the county? We have posting requirements. We have requirements that all backup must be available to the public. We like to have our stuff out 10 days in advance. This time, we were still getting information as of yesterday that we had to ask for. Is there any confusion as to what needs to be provided to the clerk of the board to get an item on the agenda now?
No, and we've, since we worked in 2008 on the Mohave prison projects, we've coordinated with the clerk's office, and we will try to make sure we get whatever information is requested. In this case, we timed the final approval meeting the day before the Board of Supervisors meeting, which is a fairly common practice for IDAs, but I understand that this board wants additional information and more lead time, so if we have future projects, I'll coordinate with the clerk's office to make sure that we schedule the final approval meeting far enough in advance to get you adequate information. To be honest, in other transactions, we have the IDA board meeting the hour before the Board of Supervisors meeting, but I understand that, and I respect that this is a board that wants to have additional information, and so we'll coordinate with your clerk's office on timing for those.
Do we have any other questions just on the IDA, gentlemen, or we move to the next item?
No.
All right. There's no action needed on item number 4. Item number 5 is adoption of Board of Supervisors Resolution 2012-141. I have a motion for discussion.
Motion for discussion.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. If we could have the attorney come back forward again. I think because of the information not flowing as it usually does with it, it brought up more questions than we normally would have. Usually the board is very involved in all projects, and we weren't too much involved in this one. This project that you're proposing today, a company has gone to the city of Lake Havasu and selling them a solar project, and they gave them a bid, and somehow the city of Lake Havasu will save money on their electric rates. Is that correct?
And in terms of the transaction with Lake Havasu, I believe that Lake Havasu issued an RFP. A company responded to the RFP and was awarded a contract. The company that has ultimately been awarded the contract with the city applied for financing through the Industrial Development Authority of Mohave County, and that's how we became involved in the transaction.
Now, are the savings that they will receive through the IDA going to be passed along to the city of Lake Havasu?
In terms of the savings, number one, the IDA itself doesn't know if there will be any savings for the project. And so, no, we don't have any involvement in the transaction between the city and the entity that the city is contracted with. Our role is simply to facilitate the financing through the issuance of the IDA bonds that get the Qualified Energy Construction Bond credits. I'm assuming that the QECB credits and the value of the financing and the cost of the financing are all factored by the finance people, and this is part of the transaction. But the IDA itself is not involved in the transaction with the city of Lake Havasu. We're involved with the bank and the borrower, which is Lake Havasu, or LHC Solar LLC. And also to be clear that the Board of Supervisors, the approval that you're giving isn't necessarily approving the project itself. You're approving the proceedings of the Industrial Development Authority that have led to the issuance of the bonds. So, you know, I know it may be difficult to conceive of it this way, but a vote of approval for this bond issue is not the Board of Supervisors saying we approve of this project and think it's a good project. It's really a separate, a limited purpose to your vote of approval.
Right. But going back to, like, say, comparing us with the prison, when the prison came in and asked for, I think we might have even offered it to them, saying we can use the Industrial Development Authority. And the reason for that was by going through the IDA, their tax-free bonds saved them money in the cost of building their project. So that enabled them to bid cheaper with the state in order to get that contract. So what I'm trying to say is there's a reason. I just don't want to give tax-free bonds and the city of Lake Havasu doesn't get the benefit of that. I'm not interested in giving this to a foreign company. I mean, what do I care how they get their financing? We want to make sure that city of Lake Havasu is getting the benefits, because I didn't follow this, I'm just asking you. The company answered an RFP and said we can do it for this amount of money. I don't know if in the RFP it said, well, if we can get you financing, will you do it 3% cheaper or something? But if they bid on it and now we're giving them bonds that are cheaper money, will that savings go on to Lake Havasu City?
Well, number one, I don't know. I can't say that the issuance of the IDA bonds will be any cheaper than any other form of financing that they would have used. It's a convenient method of doing it. And I honestly can't answer the questions about the cost savings to the city because we haven't been involved in that part of the transaction. But there are city representatives here who may be able to address that issue of cost savings to the city and how that transaction was structured, if you would like them to address that question.
Well, I'll see if I have any more questions. If you are with this bonding, without the bonding, at least, may I understand it's already, the project's already been started, so they don't need the bonding to begin with?
No, that's not my understanding, is that the bonding is really critical to the borrower in securing the Qualified Energy Construction Bond tax credits and proceeding with the project. There may have been some preliminary work that can be done, but it's my understanding from the borrower that the issuance of the bonds is critical to the completion of the project and to the full commencement of the project. And again, the city representatives can address the timing issues on that.
And then these bonds are to be I believe it said December of 2012 was when this would be up to, but the bonding could be issued, but there's a bonding that's already being sold next week or this week?
We're scheduled to close at the beginning of next week on this transaction because there is a timing deadline for the securing of the tax credits, so that if the board approves the issuance of the bonds, there will be a closing on Monday, but the bonds will be issued for a much longer term than that. I believe they're either 15 or 20-year bonds. But that's the closing will be fast. We'll be working to get things done between now and Monday.
All right. We had a discussion about the open meeting law. I have a question regarding your first meeting in July,
Sure.
where this bond was voted down. This board, city council boards, all the boards that I'm familiar with, when something's voted down, the only way it can be brought back up is when a member on the winning side puts it back up. Reading, excuse me, reading your minutes, it just looked like you totally ignored the vote, went ahead and said, I'm having another meeting next time. Is what you've done since then legal as far as you're concerned?
It certainly is, and number one, the open meeting law doesn't govern any parliamentary procedure rules like that. So there's nothing in the open meeting law that prevents any public body from meeting several times on the same issue and taking different votes. There's also a concept of binding future boards, which basically says that the vote of one board at one time generally is not binding on a future board that may be constituted at a later time. My understanding of the procedural rule of the county is that the requirement to make a motion to reconsider a previous motion applies during a single meeting or an adjourned session of the meeting. So I'm not sure that the county is prohibited from reconsidering an item in September that was voted on in August. There is a concept that public bodies can change their minds as different members come in and out. The short answer is there is no legal requirement applicable to the IDA board that prohibits them from meeting on subsequent meetings to consider an item and from passing an item that was previously rejected. It's happened one other time with IDA boards that I've worked with where, similar to this situation, at the first meeting, the board members just wanted more information about the project. And that was clearly the intent of the board members, is that they wanted to get additional information. So we scheduled the second meeting. Everybody came forward, gave the board the information that they needed about the project, which largely tracks the concerns that you were raising about the impact of the project, the structure of the project. So they received that information, and at the second meeting, they voted to approve the bond issuance. And I will be signing opinion relied on by the bank saying that that's appropriate and lawful.
What it appears, each of us placed 3 members on this board, and they do that because we asked them to, and they're just citizens, and they're doing us a favor and their county a favor. And while you kind of have a little bit of hankering of how the county works, if I'm up here today and I lose a vote, either one of these gentlemen, all the way up until their term's done, can reconsider that if they've come to the wise decision that I was right and they want to agree with me. Hasn't happened yet, but it could happen before the term's out. But I can't bring it back every time and just beat a dead horse. And I guess looking at the minutes, it looked like, at least to myself, not the 9 members that we appointed were in charge. It looked like you were in charge. It's like they voted. You could have said, maybe if you want more information, what we should do is just table this till the next meeting till we have more people or we can get more information. But they voted down these bonds. Whether it was right or wrong, they voted it down, and you went straight ahead as the attorney and said, we're having another meeting, where it seems to me it would be up to the 9 members or a majority to call the next meeting and say, I'd really like to look at this more. I guess that's just bothering me a little bit that this is being run by the attorneys and not by the 9 members we put in.
Well, I don't want to convey that impression at all. The members of the Industrial Development Board who were at the first meeting specifically said that they needed more information about the project. And they had questions about the project, so may not have been reflected specifically in the minutes, but it wasn't us that directed them to have the other meeting. We understood that that was the intention of the board, and so we worked with the borrower to have the full information available at the second meeting. And that process, like I said, it's happened before with another IDA board that didn't have enough information at the first meeting. And we did exactly the same thing. We just made sure that we had the players available for the second meeting to provide the information that they wanted. And that's how the process worked. And the second vote was a lawful vote of the board, giving preliminary approval. And the critical vote is the final vote, because the preliminary approval isn't necessarily a legal requirement for the bonds to be issued. The real requirement is for the final approval resolution, which was a unanimous vote of the board present.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any questions of the attorney?
No.
Thank you. Mayor, next time. Mayor Mark Nexon's taking the time to come up. who knows where the city's going while you're gone, but the question I had, Mayor Nixon, was part of your RFP, I didn't realize you got off an RFP, but will you guys get the benefit of the savings, even though the attorney claims there'll be no savings? There's a savings by going this. So I want to make sure you guys are getting it and not giving it to some company.
Yeah, I think what maybe is misunderstood is we aren't buying a solar project. We're buying energy.
Right.
So what happens is that with the right financing, the cheaper financing, we can then negotiate better rates. And I'll give you a for instance. Flagstaff recently did a similar project, and they negotiated a rate for their solar energy at 20% above what they're paying their electric company. We're going to be paying less than we currently pay Unisource, and we have locked in no greater than a 2% escalator over the life of the contract. And as you know, Mr. Chairman, APS recently has gone to the Arizona Corporation Commission for a 4.8% increase. So if Unisource simply has an escalator, an average escalator of, say, 2.5% over the life of the project, we're going to save a little over $500,000. If their average increase is 3.5%, we're going to save over $800,000. We only buy the energy they produce. We have no maintenance costs, no building costs, no upfront costs, none of that. Now, they will use a local contractor to maintain the project, but again, if they can't produce the energy, we don't buy it. We are forced to go back to Unisource. Now, in the 4 sites, we're not buying 100% of our energy. It's usually going to be between anywhere from 35 to 50% per site. So we're still going to buy energy from Unisource, but if we can get a third to a half of it at less than we're paying Unisource, it makes sense for us.
And then so that it will help the city of Lake Havasu by them being able to, their financing be cheaper. That's what I was getting at. Whatever they do, they're passing that on to you. I didn't want to make, corporate shareholders rich when.
Agreed, agreed. These QEC bonds, QECB bonds, typically what happens is because they get these tax credits, they go back into the project to make the project cheaper to build, and then we negotiate a better price because of it. So it's kind of a circular route, but we believe that based on what we've seen in other places, and including I went to ASU, and they, in many cases, didn't start at below their energy costs. But we were able to put together a package that we were able to do that. So yes, I believe the citizens of Lake Havasu City will benefit from this.
Thank you. And then one other question I had, did you say this is going to be a local bank issuing these?
National Bank of Arizona, is my understanding, will be, they actually issue the debt to the private company. We aren't obligated to pay those back. You're not obligated. The IDA is not obligated. Again, all we're doing is buying energy.
Right. But was that bank, was that a Havasu bank or?
National Bank of Arizona, they have a branch there in Lake Havasu.
Oh, there was one other thing I guess I need to ask the attorney. Thank you,
Sure,
Mayor Nixon.
absolutely.
I appreciate that. I was noticing that obviously there must be a requirement for posting. You posted this IDA in the Bullhead paper. Is there a reason why you posted it in the Bullhead paper, not the Havasu paper?
You're talking about the notice of the TEFRA hearing?
Yes.
That was done by bond counsel. It was published in, and honestly, I didn't know if it was Bullhead or Havasu. It has to be published in a newspaper of general circulation within the county, is the requirement of the tax code. And when you publish legal notices, you go with the cheapest paper that works within the time frame. So bond counsel actually arranged for publication. That publication satisfied the requirement of the statute. My understanding is that that particular publication would have been chosen because of price and timing.
I would, I guess, just suggest that if we have something like that in the future, that we would look at that, or the IDA would look at that, because that bothers me when it's a Havasu project, the people in Havasu, not that they would have shown up, might not have shown up, but it just looks strange to be put in a bullhead paper, you know, when it's, the project's there. I mean, the bond council can actually, should be able to read and tell the difference between the cities that are, you know, 45, 50 miles apart. It just bothered me that it was another city.
So I'll keep that in mind if, when we have a future transaction. I can honestly say that after 15 years of doing these meetings, I still haven't had anybody show up for one of these hearings, but
Yeah.
I'll keep trying.
All right, thank you. Any other
Thank you.
questions, gentlemen?
No.
Okay.
We have a motion.
Make a motion for the adoption of the Board of Supervisors Resolution Number 2012-141, approving the proceedings of the Industrial Development Authority of Mohave County regarding the issuance of its not-to-exceed $2.5 million solar energy revenue bonds.
Motion to approve.
A motion and a second.
I'll
All right.
second.
No further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are adjourned.